This is Dr. Claire Mendoza, broadcasting from the Atmospheric Research Station on Mount Kendrick. If you're hearing this, then you're still alive, still breathing, and that means the pressure hasn't crushed you yet. I'm a meteorologist, or at least I was before the sky started falling. Now I'm just someone trying to document the end of the world in scientific terms, as if understanding it will somehow help us survive it. It's been 43 days since the descent began. 43 days since the clouds touched the ground. 43 days since we realized the atmosphere itself was collapsing, pressing down on us like a slowly tightening fist. And I need to tell you what I've learned, what I've witnessed, what I've lost. Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what happened to us before we all suffocate under the weight of our own sky. The first sign was so subtle that most people didn't notice. I almost didn't notice, and I've spent 15 years studying atmospheric patterns, analyzing data, predicting weather systems. It was April 3rd, early morning, 6:47 a.m. to be precise. The sun was just coming up over the eastern ridge, painting the sky in those brilliant oranges and pinks that make you remember why you became a scientist in the first place. To understand beauty, to quantify wonder. I was running pressure readings from the station like I did every day. Standard meteorological data collection that had become such routine I could do it half asleep. Temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, wind speed, cloud formations. Numbers I'd recorded thousands of times. Patterns I knew as well as my own heartbeat. The barometric pressure reading came back at 1015 millibars at 8,000 feet elevation. I stared at that number for a full minute before my brain processed what I was seeing. That should have been impossible. Completely, fundamentally impossible. At this altitude, pressure should be around 750 millibars. At 8,000 feet, the air is thin. That's the whole point of altitude. Less atmospheric pressure, less oxygen per breath. That's why athletes train in the mountains. But my instruments were telling me I was experiencing sea level pressure at 8,000 feet elevation. I assumed the equipment was malfunctioning. 15 years of experience told me instruments fail, sensors drift, calibrations get corrupted. I ran the diagnostic protocol, checking circuits and connections, testing voltage levels. The diagnostic came back clean. Ran the test again. Same result. Equipment functioning normally. Pressure reading 1015 millibars. I checked the backup barometer. The old mercury-based system we kept for redundancy. Same number. Checked the digital sensors. All three of them confirmed. Pressure was reading at sea level values despite us being more than a mile above sea level. My hands started shaking. Not from fear yet. I didn't understand enough to be afraid. From confusion, from the creeping realization that something fundamental about the world had changed overnight, and I was the first person to notice. I called the National Weather Service office in Denver. It took 20 minutes to get through. The meteorologist on duty was a woman named Janet Reeves, who I'd known for years. We'd met at conferences, shared data, complained about budget cuts and outdated equipment. Good scientist, thorough, not prone to panic. I explained what I was seeing. Janet listened quietly, then asked me to repeat the numbers. I did. She was silent for a long moment, and I could hear her typing, pulling up her own data. "Claire," she said finally, "our readings are normal. Sea level pressure at sea level. 1013 millibars. Nothing unusual. Are you sure your equipment is calibrated correctly?" I told her I'd run every diagnostic I had. Everything checked out. Asked her if any other high-altitude stations were reporting anomalies. She said she'd check and call me back. But here's what bothered me. What kept me staring at those numbers for the next hour. If my readings were correct, if the pressure at 8,000 feet was the same as pressure at sea level, that meant one of two things. Either the air at altitude had suddenly become much denser, somehow gained mass overnight, or the entire atmospheric column above us had shifted downward, compressed. Both options violated every law of physics I understood. I spent the rest of the day checking and rechecking, sent a weather balloon up with a full instrument package to get altitude readings at various levels. The protocol was simple. The balloon rises, instruments take readings every 1,000 feet. Radio transmits the data back in real time. I'd done this hundreds of times. The data that came back made no sense. At what should have been 15,000 feet, the pressure was reading like 10,000 feet. At 20,000 feet, it was reading like 15,000 feet. The temperature gradients were wrong. The oxygen levels were wrong. Everything was compressed, pushed down, like someone had taken the entire atmosphere and squeezed it from above. I plotted the data on a graph, looking for some pattern, some explanation. The line was clear. The entire atmosphere had descended by approximately 5,000 feet overnight. The air that should have been at 15,000 feet was now at 10,000 feet. The air that should have been at 10,000 feet was now at 5,000 feet. Like the whole thing had been pushed down as a unit. I filed a report with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, flagged it as critical, attached all my data, all my readings, all my diagnostic results, sent it to every contact I had in the atmospheric science community. Then I waited for someone to tell me I'd made a mistake, that there was an explanation, that everything was fine. Janet called back around 4 p.m. Her voice was different, tense. She said other high-altitude stations were starting to report similar anomalies. Weather balloons from Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, all coming back with impossible data. The atmosphere had descended, all of it, everywhere they were checking. She said NOAA was convening an emergency session, wanted me to attend via video conference at 7 p.m., wanted me to present my findings. I agreed, of course, but I couldn't shake the feeling that by the time we finished talking about what was happening, it would already be too late to matter. That night, I stood outside the station and looked up at the sky. It was clear, stars visible despite the nearly full moon. The Milky Way, a pale ribbon across the darkness. Everything looked normal, looked like it always had. The eternal sky, unchanged and unchanging. But I could feel it. The air was thicker, heavier, like being at sea level instead of at altitude. My ears kept popping, trying to adjust to a pressure that shouldn't exist at this elevation. When I took a breath, it felt too easy, too much oxygen, like my lungs were getting more than they were designed to handle at this height. I'd lived at 8,000 feet for 3 years. I knew what the air should feel like. This was wrong. The video conference that night was chaos. 30 scientists from around the country, all talking over each other, all sharing impossible data, all trying to find an explanation that made sense. The director of NOAA's Atmospheric Science Division, Dr. Raymond Park, tried to maintain order, but even he was clearly shaken. Weather balloons across North America were confirming the same thing. Atmospheric descent averaging 5,000 feet. Some areas showing more, some showing less, but the general pattern was consistent. The sky had lowered. The clouds had dropped. The entire gaseous envelope surrounding our planet had compressed downward. Theories flew back and forth. Dr. Sarah Chen from MIT suggested a massive volcanic event somewhere, releasing enough gas to increase atmospheric mass. But there were no reports of eruptions, and the gas composition hadn't changed. Dr. Marcus Williams from NOAA proposed a sudden change in solar radiation affecting atmospheric expansion. But the sun was behaving normally, and radiation levels were standard. Someone suggested gravitational anomaly. Someone else mentioned solar wind compression. A few desperate voices brought up climate change, though no climate model predicted anything like this. The theories got more outlandish as the night went on. Alien intervention, divine punishment, a black hole passing nearby, mass hallucination. No one had answers. We just knew the sky was lower than it should be, and we didn't know why or how to stop it. I presented my data around 9 p.m., showed the graphs, the pressure readings, the balloon telemetry. Dr. Park asked if I thought this was a temporary phenomenon, something that might reverse itself. I told him I had no idea, but the descent appeared stable, not fluctuating, not reversing, just holding at this new, compressed state. If anything, my latest readings suggested it might be continuing. Slowly, but continuing. The conference call lasted until 2 a.m. We established protocols for continuous monitoring, data sharing, public communication. Dr. Park said they'd brief government officials in the morning, warned us not to cause public panic, said we needed more data before making any announcements. I remember thinking, we don't have time for more data. We don't have time for protocols. Something is crushing our atmosphere, and we're sitting here having meetings about it. But I didn't say that. I thanked Dr. Park for organizing the session and logged off. Then I went outside and stared at the sky until dawn, watching for any sign of change, any indication that this was temporary. The sun rose at 6:52 a.m. on April 4th, 5 minutes later than it should have. I checked and rechecked my calculations. The sun was coming up 5 minutes late, or the Earth was rotating 5 minutes slower, or time itself was being affected. I didn't report that observation. I wasn't sure I believed it myself. By April 5th, other stations started reporting similar anomalies. Weather balloons across North America, Europe, Asia, everywhere we had monitoring equipment, were coming back with impossible data. The atmosphere had descended by an average of 5,000 feet globally. This wasn't a localized phenomenon. This was happening to the entire planet. The scientific community went into full emergency mode. Emergency conferences every 6 hours. Urgent data sharing protocols. Teams working around the clock trying to understand what was happening. NASA diverted satellites to atmospheric monitoring. The International Space Station adjusted its instruments to scan for anomalies. And that's when they found it. Or rather, found the absence of it. The astronauts on the ISS reported that the stars looked wrong. Not missing, not moved, but occluded. Like there was something between the ISS and deep space. Something vast and dark that blocked light from distant stars. Something that hadn't been there a week ago. When they tried to get readings on this object, the instruments malfunctioned, or gave readings that made no sense. It was too big, too close, too far, too dense, too diffuse. Every measurement contradicted every other measurement. The astronauts described it as a blind spot in space, an area where their instruments and their eyes agreed that something was there, but couldn't agree on what that something was. NASA classified the findings, told the astronauts not to discuss it publicly, but word leaked anyway. It always does. Within hours, amateur astronomers were pointing their telescopes up and seeing the same thing. A dark patch in the sky that shouldn't exist, growing larger, getting closer. That's when people started to panic. On April 7th, the descent accelerated. The atmosphere dropped another 3,000 feet in 12 hours. I watched it happen through my instruments, watched the pressure climb, watched the altitude readings compress. It felt like standing at the bottom of a pool and feeling the water level rise, except the water was air and there was nowhere to surface. My readings at 8,000 feet were showing 1045 millibars. In half a day, we'd gained the pressure equivalent of dropping another 3,000 feet. At sea level, they were experiencing 1050 millibars. That was already higher than the highest pressure ever recorded on Earth, and it was still rising. That was the day people started noticing. Not just scientists with instruments, but everyone. The clouds were too low. You could see it with the naked eye. Cloud bases that should have been miles overhead were now skimming treetops. In the valleys, people were walking through clouds, fog that shouldn't exist at those elevations, moisture condensing at altitudes where it had no business condensing, and the air felt wrong, too thick, too heavy, like breathing through a wet cloth. People at sea level were reporting difficulty breathing, headaches, pressure in their ears that wouldn't equalize. Athletes couldn't perform. Asthmatics were having attacks. Elderly people with respiratory issues were dying. The panic started slowly, then spread like wildfire. News reports about atmospheric collapse. Scientists on TV trying to explain what was happening while clearly having no idea. Government officials urging calm while emergency services were already overwhelmed. Social media exploded with theories. Climate change, government weather experiments, alien invasion, divine punishment, the rapture, the end times. I stayed at the station, documenting everything. Someone needed to maintain scientific records. Someone needed to track this objectively, clinically, without letting fear compromise the data. And I had nowhere else to go anyway. My husband Daniel had died 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to death. 18 months of watching him fade, watching the pain medication stop working, watching him choose dignity over prolonging the inevitable. My daughter Emma was studying marine biology abroad in Australia. 23 years old, brilliant, passionate about saving the oceans. We'd talked on the phone 2 days before the descent started. She was excited about her research, about a paper she was writing, about a boy she'd met who shared her love of reef ecosystems. I'd been trying to reach her since April 3rd, but international communications were degrading as satellites struggled with the changing atmospheric density. Signals were getting garbled, connections were dropping. The last message I got from her was a text on April 6th. Mom, something weird happening here too. Pressure rising, people getting sick. Love you. I sent back, stay high, get to elevation. I love you so much. Never got a confirmation it was delivered. On April 10th, the clouds reached the ground permanently. Not fog, not mist. Actual clouds. I stood outside the station and watched them roll past at eye level. Thick white masses moving through the trees, condensation dripping from every surface, visibility reduced to maybe 50 feet. The cloud base was at ground level. We were inside the clouds now, living in them, breathing them. The moisture was oppressive. Everything was wet. Equipment was corroding. Mold started growing on surfaces within hours. The dampness seeped into clothing, into bedding, into lungs. People developed respiratory infections, coughs that wouldn't stop, fevers that wouldn't break. That was also the day birds started falling from the sky. Not dead, just falling. They'd try to fly and couldn't gain altitude. The air was too dense, too heavy. Their wings, designed for normal atmospheric pressure, couldn't generate enough lift in this compressed air. I watched a hawk try to take off from a tree branch outside my window and immediately crash back down, confused and panicking, its wings beating uselessly against air that had become too thick to fly through. I watched a flock of geese attempt their migration north. They launched themselves from a lake in the valley below, honking and calling, wings beating in that powerful, synchronized rhythm that had carried their species across continents for millions of years. They made it maybe 50 feet before they had to land, exhausted, their bodies not designed for air this dense. Some of them tried again, and again, and again, until they collapsed from exhaustion, still calling to each other, still trying to answer the migratory instinct that no longer matched the world they lived in. If birds couldn't fly, what did that mean for airplanes? For helicopters? For anything that relied on normal atmospheric conditions? The answer came that afternoon. I was listening to emergency broadcasts when the reports started coming in. Commercial airliners trying to land at airports, coming in at wrong angles because the flight computers were calibrated for normal air density. The planes were dropping too fast, stalling too early, overshooting runways. The pilots couldn't compensate quickly enough. Their training, their instruments, their instincts were all based on atmospheric conditions that no longer existed. A 737 crashed at Denver International, came in too fast, couldn't slow down in the dense air, overshot the runway, and crashed into a terminal building. 142 people dead. A regional jet in Phoenix lost control during landing when the sudden density shift caused asymmetric thrust. Cartwheeled across the runway, 67 dead. An Airbus in Seattle pancaked onto the tarmac when it stalled 50 feet up, the wings unable to maintain lift. 203 dead. The FAA grounded all flights globally within 2 hours. Every airplane in the sky was ordered to land immediately, regardless of fuel status, regardless of destination. Airports that could handle the landings tried. Many couldn't. The crashes continued for hours until finally, blessedly, the skies were empty of human flight. Helicopters went down too. Traffic copters, medical transports, news choppers, military birds. The dense air changed their rotor dynamics, changed their fuel consumption, changed everything about how they flew. Most pilots realized too late. The lucky ones auto-rotated down and crashed hard but survivably. The unlucky ones just fell. In one day, we lost the ability to fly. The sky that was falling had taken flight away from us, grounded us, made us earthbound again. Humanity's century of aviation, gone. We were walking now, driving at best. And soon, neither of those would be possible either. By April the 12th, the atmosphere had descended 15,000 feet total in 9 days. Mountain peaks that had been above the cloud layer, bare rock summits where you could stand and see for 100 miles, were now buried in thick clouds. The cloud ceiling was now below what used to be tree line. The highest clouds were maybe at 5,000 feet elevation, when they should have been at 20,000 feet or higher. People at sea level were experiencing pressure levels that should have required them to be 15,000 feet underwater. Barometric readings at coastal cities were showing 1,200 millibars. That kind of pressure causes nitrogen narcosis in divers, causes confusion, impaired judgment, euphoria followed by unconsciousness, and eventually death. The emergency broadcasts reported that people in low-lying areas were exhibiting strange symptoms. Difficulty breathing, not from lack of oxygen, but from too much oxygen at too high a pressure. Oxygen toxicity, It poisons the body, causes seizures, causes lung damage, causes cell death. People were getting dizzy, confused, euphoric. They'd laugh inappropriately, make poor decisions, wander off without purpose, then they'd collapse, have seizures, slip into comas, die while surrounded by air that should sustain them, but instead poisoned them. Others developed what they called pressure sickness. The medical term is barotrauma, headaches that felt like ice picks driven into your skull, nosebleeds that wouldn't stop, burst blood vessels in the eyes, turning whites red, ruptured eardrums, internal bleeding as organs not designed to handle this much pressure simply gave out. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Hospitals ran out of beds, out of supplies, out of staff as medical personnel succumbed to the same pressure sickness they were trying to treat. Doctors tried hyperbaric protocols in reverse, trying to reduce effective pressure, but there was nowhere to decompress to. The whole world was a pressure chamber now. I was safe at 8,000 feet for now. The pressure here was around 1050 millibars. High, but still within survivable range. My body could adapt to that, could handle it. But for how long? If the atmosphere kept descending, eventually even mountain elevations would be under impossible pressure. On April 13th, government broadcasts became more desperate. The president addressed the nation, reading from prepared remarks that barely concealed the panic behind them. He said scientists were working on solutions, that emergency protocols were in place, that people should remain calm and follow evacuation orders. But what evacuation orders? Where were people supposed to go? The only answer was up, to higher elevations, to mountains, to anywhere the pressure was still survivable. On April 15th, the first wave of deaths was officially reported, though everyone knew the real numbers were far higher. Not from accidents or panic, but from the pressure itself. People in coastal cities, in valleys, in anywhere below 2,000 feet elevation were dying by the thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. Their lungs couldn't handle the dense air, couldn't process oxygen at those pressures. They'd gasp and choke and suffocate while surrounded by air. The mass exodus began. Everyone who could move started heading to higher elevations. Millions of people fleeing cities, climbing mountains, desperate to stay ahead of the crushing pressure. It was the largest human migration in history, and it was driven by pure survival instinct. Roads became parking lots within hours. Highways jammed with cars that ran out of gas and were abandoned where they stopped. People walked carrying whatever they could. Suitcases, backpacks, children, elderly relatives. They left everything behind. Left homes and possessions and pets and anything that would slow them down. Just trying to get higher, to breathe, to survive. I watched them from the station. Saw the refugees streaming up the mountain access roads. Thousands of them, more every hour, more every day. They moved in long lines, like ants, following the roads until the roads became too steep or too blocked, then continuing on foot, scrambling over rocks, through trees, up slopes that got steeper as they climbed. Some made it to the station and begged to be let in. They'd knock on the door, faces pressed to the windows, eyes desperate. They'd plead, beg, offer money, possessions, anything. The facility wasn't designed for refugees. It was a research station. 3 bedrooms, 1 common area, 1 lab, 1 bathroom. Supplies for maybe 3 people for 3 months. But how could I turn them away? How could I look at a mother holding a crying child and say no? How could I watch an elderly couple who'd climbed for days collapse on my doorstep and not help them? I let in 12. Let in. 12 people who made it to 8,000 feet before collapsing from exhaustion. 12 survivors who looked at me like I was their salvation when I was just a scientist with dwindling supplies and no answers. There was the Carter family, Robert and Michelle with their 2 children, Sam, age 7, and Emily, age 9. Robert was a high school history teacher from Denver. Michelle was a social worker. They'd walked for 3 days to reach the station, carrying their kids when they got too tired to walk. Sam had asthma. The dense air at lower elevations had nearly killed him. They'd watched him turn blue, watched him gasp for air that was too thick to breathe properly, and they'd run. Carried him up the mountain while he struggled to breathe, while Michelle cried and prayed and begged God for just a little more time. There was an elderly couple, Henry and Judith Mason, married 52 years, both in their 70s. Henry had been a mechanical engineer. Judith had been a librarian. They'd lived in a retirement community near Boulder, a nice place with gardens and activities and friends. When the descent started, their friends told them they were too old to climb, that they should stay and face the end with dignity. But Henry had told me, 52 years together isn't enough. I'm not ready to let her go. Not yet. Not ever. So they'd walked, slowly, painfully, taking breaks every 100 feet, but they'd walked for 5 days until they reached the station. There were 3 college students, Tyler, Amanda, and Zoe. They'd been on a hiking trip when the descent started, spring break adventure in the Rockies. Tyler was studying engineering at CSU. Amanda was pre-med. Zoe was an art major. They'd been up at 10,000 feet when it started, had watched the clouds descend below them, had heard the radio reports, and understood before most people that altitude meant survival. They'd come down to warn people, to help, but the valleys were already chaos. They'd turned around and climbed back up, collecting refugees as they went, helping people who were struggling, sharing their supplies. They were young and strong and good, and I wondered how long those qualities would matter in a world where the sky was crushing us. There was Carlos Martinez, a long-haul truck driver who'd been making a delivery to Durango when everything changed. He was in his 40s, heavily tattooed, with a wedding ring he kept touching unconsciously. His wife Rosa and their 3 kids, Miguel, Sophia, and Isabella, lived in Albuquerque. He'd been trying to get back to them, but Albuquerque was at 5,300 feet, and by the time he understood what was happening, the city was already under impossible pressure. He'd called them on April 10th, his last successful connection. Rosa said people were dying, said the air was wrong, said the kids were scared. She'd asked him what to do, and he'd told her to head east, to get to higher ground, to meet him at the mountains. He never heard from them again. Spent 3 days trying to get through on dead phone lines before accepting that Albuquerque was gone. His family was gone. He'd driven up the mountain because he didn't know what else to do, because moving forward was better than stopping, because maybe if he kept going, he'd find purpose again. There was Diane Foster, a nurse from Riverside General Hospital. She was in her 50s, competent and unflappable, the kind of medical professional who stays calm during emergencies. She'd been working in the ER when the pressure casualties started coming in, had watched people die from conditions she'd never seen before, couldn't treat, couldn't even understand. The hospital had been overwhelmed in hours. Power failed. Backup generators ran out of fuel. Equipment stopped working. Diane had stayed until the building itself started groaning under the pressure, until cracks appeared in the walls, until she realized staying was suicide. She'd grabbed what medical supplies she could carry and walked away from 20 years of her career, walked away from patients she couldn't help, walked up the mountain because someone had to survive who knew how to treat injuries and illnesses. And there was Marcus Chen, a 16-year-old kid traveling alone. His parents had been astronomers, both of them, working at an observatory in Arizona. They'd seen it coming somehow, had understood what the darkness in space meant before anyone else, had sent Marcus north, told him to get to altitude, given him supplies and instructions and hugs that lasted too long. He'd left on April 5th, had gotten regular calls from them for the first 3 days. His dad explaining the science, his mom making him promise to survive, to keep going, to not give up. The last call came on April 8th, his mom's voice saying they loved him, that he was a good son, that he needed to be strong. Then the line went dead. Marcus had kept walking. 16 years old, alone, carrying his dead parents' last words with him up a mountain. He barely spoke, just stared at people with old eyes and a young face. 12 people crammed into a research station designed for 3. 12 terrified survivors looking to me for answers I didn't have, for hope I couldn't provide, for salvation I couldn't deliver. I assigned sleeping spaces, set up a rationing system for food and water, established rules about waste management and hygiene, tried to create structure because structure was all we had. Without it, we were just animals waiting to die. That first night with refugees, I couldn't sleep. Lay in my narrow bed, listening to 12 other people breathing, crying, praying. Listening to Sam's wheezing breath as his asthma struggled with the pressure. Listening to Judith's quiet crying as her body dealt with pain she was too proud to complain about. Listening to Carlos whisper his wife's name like a prayer. Rosa. 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 I thought about Emma. Wondered if she'd made it to high ground in Australia. Wondered if the descent was happening there too, or if this was somehow localized to the northern hemisphere. Wondered if she was lying in a bed somewhere listening to other people breathe and thinking about me. I wanted to believe she was alive, needed to believe it. Because if Emma was dead, then what was the point of surviving? What was the point of documenting humanity's extinction if there was no one left to remember that documentation mattered? On April 16th, I set up a regular broadcast schedule. Twice a day, 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., I'd transmit updates on the atmospheric conditions, survival information, warnings about pressure levels at different elevations. Used the station's radio equipment to reach as far as possible. Didn't know if anyone was listening, but it gave me purpose. Gave me something to do besides watch people die slowly. The responses came sporadically. Other survivors with radio equipment. A ham radio operator in Wyoming. A National Guard unit that had secured a ski resort at 9,000 feet. A family broadcasting from their basement with jury-rigged antenna. We formed an informal network, sharing information, warning each other about hazards, just keeping voices in the air so we knew we weren't alone. On April 18th, everything changed again. The descent had been steady until then, measurable, predictable in its horror. But on April 18th, something new happened. I was outside taking readings around 2 p.m. when I noticed the clouds looked different. Thicker, more textured, moving in patterns that didn't match the wind. I watched for 20 minutes, trying to understand what I was seeing, when suddenly the clouds parted. For just a moment, maybe 30 seconds, the cloud layer opened up like a curtain being pulled back, and I saw what was above. The sky wasn't blue. It was gray-green, sickly, the color of infected tissue or stagnant water. And there were patterns in it, geometric shapes that moved and shifted like oil on water, like light through a prism, like something alive. Not clouds, not weather, something else. And there were shapes, distant, massive, things that cast shadows through the gray-green sky, shadows that fell across the cloud layer in patterns that made no sense. The shadows had too many edges, too many angles. They moved independently of anything casting them, flowing across the clouds like living things. I grabbed my binoculars, tried to focus on the shapes above. Through the lenses, they were clearer but no more comprehensible. They looked organic, curved surfaces that glistened, structures that might have been limbs or might have been something with no analogy in terrestrial biology. And they were huge, kilometers across at least, maybe tens of kilometers, floating in that gray-green sky like jellyfish in the ocean. The clouds closed again. The moment passed. But I'd seen it. Seen proof that this wasn't a natural phenomenon, wasn't some atmospheric anomaly or climate event. Something was up there, something vast and alive, and it was descending with the collapsing sky. I told the others, gathered everyone in the common room and explained what I'd seen. Robert thought I was hallucinating, that pressure was affecting my brain. Tyler wanted to go outside and watch for the clouds to open again. Diane asked calmly if I was sure, if I documented it, if I had proof. I had no proof, just what I'd seen. But that night, we all stood outside and watched the clouds. And around 9 p.m. they parted again, just for a few seconds. And everyone saw it. The gray-green sky, the geometric patterns, the massive shapes floating above us. Young Sam asked his mother, "Are those the angels coming to take us to heaven?" Michelle didn't answer, just held him tighter. Marcus, the teenager, said quietly, "My parents were right. They said something was coming from beyond the sky. They said the darkness they detected was something blocking out the stars, something approaching Earth." Henry Mason, the old engineer, watched through his own binoculars and said, "That's not technology, not as we understand it. Those things are alive, or alive in a way that's so different from us that the word doesn't really apply." That night, we heard the sounds for the first time, deep and resonant, coming from above, traveling through the dense air like whale song through water. Low-frequency rumbles that you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears. Not mechanical hums, not natural thunder or wind. Something in between, something purposeful, like communication or echolocation, or just the sound those things made existing in our atmosphere. The sound made your teeth ache and your stomach turn, made you feel watched, made you understand on a visceral animal level that we were prey now, that something incomprehensibly large had noticed us, and we were insignificant to it. Insects, bacteria, less than nothing. Tyler vomited from the sound. Amanda held him while he heaved, while his body rejected the vibration traveling through his organs. Zoe covered her ears and cried. It didn't help. You couldn't block out something that resonated through your skeleton. The sounds continued for hours. We huddled inside the station, pressed together for comfort, and listened to the world change around us. Listened to our extinction announced in frequencies we'd never been designed to hear. On April 20th, the pressure at the station reached 1,100 millibars. That meant the atmosphere had descended another 5,000 feet since April 15th. We were experiencing sea level pressure at 8,000 feet elevation, which meant sea level was experiencing pressure equivalent to being 5,000 feet underwater. Nobody could survive at sea level anymore. The pressure would crush you, literally squeeze the air from your lungs, burst vessels in your brain, cause your organs to hemorrhage. Coastal cities were death zones now. Anyone who hadn't evacuated was dead. The radio broadcasts from lower elevations had stopped. The last transmission from Denver came at 3 a.m. on April 20th. An emergency broadcaster named Alex Timmons, voice strained and gasping. He said the pressure was crushing buildings, that windows were imploding from the pressure differential, that people's lungs were collapsing, that blood was seeping from every opening, eyes, nose, mouth, ears. He said he could see something in the clouds above the city, something huge descending through the dense air, something with tendrils that reached down and touched buildings, and wherever they touched, the structures dissolved, turned to dust or vapor or just ceased existing. He said, "If anyone is listening, get to the mountains. Get as high as you can. Don't stop climbing until you can't breathe anymore, and then climb higher. It's coming down. All of it. They're coming down. God help us." Then the transmission cut to static. I tried other frequencies, tried to reach anyone at lower elevations. Nothing but empty air and occasional bursts of that sound. That deep, resonant tone that wasn't language but felt like it meant something. Like a beacon. Like a call. Like something announcing its arrival. The people at the station were deteriorating. Even at 8,000 feet, the pressure was affecting us. Constant headaches that over-the-counter painkillers couldn't touch. Nosebleeds every morning. Vision problems. Blurriness. Seeing halos around lights. Difficulty focusing. Our bodies were struggling to adapt to conditions they'd never been designed for. Diane tried to help, rationing the limited medical supplies we had. She gave Judith aspirin for pain, gave Sam breathing treatments for his asthma, gave Carlos something to help him sleep because he'd been staying awake for days, listening to dead phone lines, hoping his family would call. But there was only so much she could do. We weren't sick. We weren't injured. We were being crushed. Slowly but inevitably crushed by our own atmosphere. Young Emily asked me one morning, "Dr. Mendoza, when is the sky going to go back up?" I didn't know how to answer. Didn't know how to explain to a 9-year-old that the sky wasn't coming back up, that this was permanent, that those things above us had changed our world forever. I told her, "I don't know, sweetie, but we're going to keep you safe as long as we can." It was a lie. We both knew it. But sometimes lies are kinder than truth. Marcus, the teenager, spent hours at the radio trying to reach his parents, even though he knew they were dead. He'd call their number, let it ring, talk into the static like they could hear him, tell them about his day, about the other survivors, about how he was trying to be strong like they'd asked. Once I heard him say, "I'm scared, Mom. I'm trying not to be, but I'm so scared. And I miss you. I miss you so much it feels like I can't breathe. But I'm still going. I'm still climbing. Like you told me to." I left him alone with his grief. We all had to process this in our own way. On April 23rd, the shapes in the clouds became clearer. The atmosphere had descended enough that whatever was up there was closer now. Maybe only a few thousand feet above us instead of miles. We could make out details through binoculars. They weren't ships, weren't aircraft or spacecraft or any kind of technology we recognized. They were organic, living things, massive beyond comprehension, floating in the dense air like jellyfish float in the ocean, like whales swimming through the sky. Their bodies were translucent, like they were made of something between flesh and membrane. Through the semi-transparent surfaces, we could see internal structures. things that might have been organs pulsing and flowing, networks of what looked like nerves or veins, glowing faintly with bioluminescence, structures that served purposes we couldn't begin to understand. They had appendages that trailed below them for miles, dozens of them on each creature, hanging down like tentacles or roots, moving slowly, independently, touching the cloud layer and sending ripples through it. Where the appendages touched, the clouds changed color, turned from white to gray-green, started showing those geometric patterns. Tyler, who'd been studying engineering, watched through binoculars for hours and finally said, "I think they're filtering, or feeding. Those appendages are sampling the atmosphere, taking what they need, changing the composition." Henry Mason watched beside him and added, "We're not being attacked. Not really. They're just making the world suitable for them. Terraforming, atmosphere forming, whatever you want to call it. They need high-pressure environments, dense air, and they're creating it by compressing our atmosphere." Robert Carter asked, "But why? Why Earth? Why our world?" Henry looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. "Because it's here. Because they can. Because to something that vast, our existence doesn't even register. We were always bugs to them, Robert. Just insects crawling on the surface. And now they're coming down to see what happens when they step on us." That night, Amanda had a breakdown. Started screaming that she couldn't take it anymore. That waiting to die was worse than dying. That she wanted it to be over. Zoe held her while she screamed and cried and beat her fists against the wall. Tyler tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away. Finally, exhausted, she collapsed and just whispered, "I was going to be a doctor. I was going to save people. And now I'm just going to die on a mountain without ever doing anything that mattered." Diane knelt beside her and said quietly, "You've mattered to us. You've been strong and brave and kind. That matters. That will always matter, even if no one's left to remember it." It was cold comfort, but it was all we had. On April 25th, we lost the children. Sam and Emily Carter went outside in the afternoon, while their parents were helping inventory supplies. They were just kids, bored and restless from being cooped up in the station. They didn't understand the danger, thought this was an adventure, thought they were exploring. Michelle realized they were missing around 3 p.m. We searched everywhere. The station wasn't that big. They weren't inside. Robert went outside calling their names, voice getting more frantic with each unanswered call. We found them 20 minutes later, a quarter-mile down the mountain, sitting together in the compressed clouds. Just sitting there peacefully, cross-legged on the ground, with their eyes open and their mouths moving like they were talking to something we couldn't see. Robert ran to them, shouting their names. They didn't respond, didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. Just kept staring up into the clouds and moving their lips, forming words we couldn't hear, responding to something invisible. He tried to lift Sam. The boy struggled, fought against him, kept trying to look back at the clouds. Emily started crying, but not normal crying. It was mechanical, like her body remembered how to cry but didn't remember why. Robert had to carry them both, one under each arm, back to the station while they fought and twisted and tried to see what they'd been looking at. Michelle was waiting at the door. Took her children from Robert's arms, held them, rocked them, begged them to talk to her. They didn't, couldn't, wouldn't. Just stared at nothing with empty eyes. Diane examined them, checked their pupils, their reflexes, their vital signs. Everything was normal. Heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, temperature, all normal. But they were gone, catatonic. Like something in the clouds had reached into their minds and flipped a switch, turning off whatever made them human. Michelle held them and cried. Robert stood by the window looking out at the clouds with rage and helplessness warring in his eyes, like he could fight the sky itself if he could just figure out how. That night, I heard Michelle singing to her children. Lullabies she'd probably sung since they were babies. Her voice was broken and raw, but she sang anyway. Sang about mockingbirds and stars and sunshine. Sang about a world that didn't exist anymore. Sang because what else could she do? The children didn't respond, just stared at the ceiling with those empty eyes, occasionally smiling these vacant smiles that didn't reach their eyes, that looked like masks of joy worn by something that didn't understand joy. On April 27th, the pressure reached 1250 millibars at the station. My instruments were maxing out. The needles were pinned at the highest readings they could display. We were experiencing pressure equivalent to being half a mile underwater, about 1,500 feet. A pressure that would kill a diver who hadn't acclimatized properly. Breathing was labor now. Every breath required conscious effort. You had to think about it, had to force your diaphragm to work against the pressure crushing your chest. Sleep became difficult because you'd stop breathing if you didn't focus. People were taking turns on watch, shaking each other awake when they stopped breathing in their sleep. We were developing symptoms of pressure sickness that Diane had only read about in diving medicine texts. The bends, nitrogen bubbles forming in our bloodstream as our bodies struggled to handle the pressure. Nitrogen narcosis, feeling drunk or euphoric as nitrogen buildup affected our brains. Oxygen toxicity, our bodies being poisoned by air that should sustain us. Tyler started laughing one afternoon. Just sudden, uncontrollable laughter. He laughed for 6 hours straight, tears streaming down his face, unable to stop, unable to explain what was funny. We tried to calm him down, but he couldn't control it. Just laughed and laughed until he passed out from exhaustion. When he woke up hours later, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I understood something while I was laughing. The pressure is changing us, breaking down our structures, making us more compatible with them, like we're being prepared, processed, made ready for whatever comes next. Zoe asked, Ready for what? Tyler looked at her with eyes that had seen something the rest of us hadn't. I don't know, but whatever's up there, it's not just crushing us, it's changing us, remaking us. And maybe that's better than dying. Maybe that's the closest thing to survival we have left. Nobody argued with him, because maybe he was right. Maybe the children weren't catatonic. Maybe they'd just changed first. Evolved or adapted or been transformed into something that could exist in this new world. On April 29th, the clouds parted for nearly an hour, the longest opening yet. We all went outside and looked up at what our world had become. The sky wasn't a sky anymore. It was a ceiling. Gray-green and pulsing, maybe 5,000 feet above us, pressing down. The floating creatures were everywhere now. Dozens visible, maybe hundreds beyond the horizon. They moved through the compressed air in formation, purposeful, like a fleet, or an invasion force, or a migration. Below them, we could see the valleys, the land below 5,000 feet elevation. And it was crushed, completely, totally crushed. Buildings reduced to rubble, compressed into the ground. Trees squeezed down to splinters and pulp. Roads flattened. Cars compacted into disks of metal. Everything humanity had built at low elevations was gone. squeezed out of existence by the weight of the falling sky. And among the ruins, things were moving. Shapes that picked through the compressed landscape. Not human, not the floating creatures, something else. Ground-based organisms that had come with the descent, that thrived in high pressure, that were exploring their new habitat. Through binoculars, they looked like nothing I could describe. Imagine trying to explain an octopus to someone who'd only ever seen terrestrial animals. These were like that, but more alien. They had radial symmetry, or bilateral, or no symmetry at all. They moved by flowing, or walking on too many legs, or sliding. They were crystalline, or fleshy, or something in between. And they were feeding, or mining, or just exploring. Hard to tell. But wherever they touched, the ground changed, became glossy, reflective, like the earth itself was transforming into something else. Some of the glossy areas had structures growing from them, towers or fungi or buildings, impossible to say. Just vertical masses rising from transformed ground. Carlos whispered, terraforming. They're remaking the earth, making it theirs. We watched until the clouds closed again, watched our world being taken from us, watched the future that didn't include humanity taking shape in the crushed valleys below. That night, we had to make a decision. The pressure at 8,000 feet was becoming unsurvivable. We were all experiencing severe symptoms. Judith Mason couldn't walk anymore. Her legs had given out, blood vessels bursting under the pressure, internal bleeding that Diane couldn't stop with our limited medical supplies. Henry refused to leave her, said 52 years together meant something, meant everything. The Carter children couldn't be moved. They didn't respond to stimuli anymore. Just lay in their makeshift beds staring at nothing, occasionally making sounds that weren't words, smiling those empty smiles. Michelle and Robert had stopped talking about leaving, had stopped talking much at all. Just sat with their children, holding their hands, waiting. But the rest of us needed to go higher. The summit of Mount Kendrick was at 11,000 feet. If we could reach it, we might buy ourselves more time, might survive another week, maybe two, before the descending atmosphere caught up with us again. But the climb was 3 miles of steep terrain. In our weakened states, with the pressure making every movement exhausting, some of us wouldn't make it. We'd die on the mountain trying to reach a summit that would only delay the inevitable. We voted. Democratic. Everyone gets a say in how they die. The only fair way to do it. 8 voted to attempt the climb. Me, Carlos, Diane, Marcus, Tyler, Amanda, Zoe, and Robert, who'd changed his mind at the last second, saying he couldn't just sit and wait. 4 voted to stay. Henry and Judith Mason, and Michelle with the children. We spent that night preparing, divided what supplies we could spare, packed light but essential items, food, water. Medical supplies, warm clothes, the portable radio transmitter so I could keep broadcasting. In the morning, we said goodbye. Hugged people we knew we'd never see again. Michelle held me and whispered, "Thank you for trying to save them. Thank you for letting us in. I'm sorry we couldn't be stronger." I told her she was the strongest person I'd ever met, that watching her care for her children even after they were gone, that was strength beyond measure. Henry shook my hand with his weathered grip and said, "Document this. Make sure someone knows what happened to us. That's all that matters now. That someone remembers we existed." I promised I would. Promised that as long as I was alive, I'd keep broadcasting, keep recording, keep telling our story. We left at dawn on May 2nd, 8 people with backpacks full of supplies, starting a 3-mile climb in air so thick it felt like swimming through oil. The first mile took 6 hours. 6 hours to cover about 5,000 feet horizontally and gain 1,000 feet elevation. Every step was agony. The pressure made movement feel like wading through honey. Our lungs burned, our hearts hammered. Our muscles screamed for oxygen they couldn't get properly, despite the abundance of air. Diane had to stop every few minutes to let her blood pressure stabilize. She'd close her eyes, breathe deeply, wait for the spots in her vision to clear. Carlos vomited twice from the exertion, his body rejecting the abuse. But we kept moving because stopping meant dying. Robert was struggling more than anyone. He'd made a decision in his heart, but his body wasn't cooperating. Every 100 feet he'd slow down, fall behind. We'd have to wait for him to catch up. I could see him fighting his own desire to turn around, go back, be with his family when the end came. On the mountainside, we saw them up close for the first time. The things descending with the sky. One of the massive floating creatures passed maybe 100 feet above us, close enough to feel the air displacement from its movement, close enough to make out details that my brain struggled to process. Its body was translucent membrane stretched over impossible anatomy. I saw organs that looked like they belonged to multiple species, or no species, or species that had never existed on Earth. Saw structures that might have been eyes, clusters of 7 arranged in geometric patterns, all different sizes. Saw the appendages trailing below it, thousands of thin tendrils that tasted the air or sampled the atmosphere or communicated through chemical signals we couldn't detect. It was beautiful in the way deep sea creatures are beautiful, alien, strange, perfectly adapted to an environment hostile to human life. And we were in its environment now. The crushing pressure that killed us was normal to it. Home. This dense, thick air was what it had always lived in, what it needed to survive. As it passed over us, one of the trailing appendages brushed the ground 50 feet away. Where it touched, the rock turned that glossy color, transformed instantly from stone to something else. And from the glossy patch, something started growing. A vertical structure that rose slowly, pulling matter from the ground, reshaping it. We watched for maybe 30 seconds before Carlos said, "We need to keep moving, before one of those things touches us." We climbed faster after that. Fear is a powerful motivator. Around 9,000 feet elevation, Tyler started laughing again. That same uncontrollable nitrogen narcosis laugh. Amanda tried to calm him down, but he pushed her away, still laughing, tears streaming down his face. He said between gasps, "Don't you see? Don't you understand? We're the aliens now. We were always the aliens. This is their planet. Has been for billions of years, probably. We just didn't know it. We were living on the surface of their world, building our civilization in a thin layer they didn't care about. And now they're coming home, coming back to reclaim what was always theirs. We're the invasion species. We're the ones who don't belong." Then he stopped laughing, looked at us with perfect clarity, and said, "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Can't keep climbing toward nothing. Can't keep pretending we have a chance." Before anyone could stop him, before we even understood what he meant, Tyler walked to the edge of the path, looked back at us once with eyes that held no fear, only acceptance, and stepped off. He fell into the clouds below, didn't scream, didn't flail, just stepped into the void like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he was walking through a door into somewhere better. Amanda screamed, tried to go after him. Zoe and I grabbed her, held her back. There was nothing we could do. Tyler was gone, made his choice. Decided that ending it quickly was better than the slow death we were all facing. Amanda collapsed against Zoe, sobbing. We stayed there for an hour, holding each other, crying for Tyler and for ourselves and for everyone who'd been lost. Then we kept climbing. Because what else could we do? 7 of us now. The second mile took 8 hours. We were above 10,000 feet, and the pressure was increasing faster than we were climbing. My instruments showed 1,300 millibars. We'd gained 2,000 feet of elevation and lost ground to the falling sky. The atmospheric descent was accelerating. We were all showing severe symptoms now. Diane was bleeding from her ears, blood trickling down her neck that she couldn't stop. Carlos couldn't see properly, blood vessels bursting in his eyes, turning the whites red, his vision blurry and doubled. Marcus had stopped talking altogether, just focused on moving one foot in front of the other, his young face aged decades by pain and fear. Robert collapsed around 4 p.m., just sat down on a rock and said he couldn't go further. Said his heart was giving out. We tried to help him up, but he pushed us away with surprising strength. I need to go back, he said. Michelle and the kids are alone. They need me. I should be with them. I knelt beside him. Robert, you can't make it back. It's 8 miles downhill in your condition. You'll die before you reach the station. He smiled weakly. Then I'll die trying to get to them. That's better than dying up here without them. He stood slowly, painfully, took his backpack off and handed it to Carlos. You'll need the supplies more than me. Get to the top. Broadcast what happened. Tell people we tried. Then he turned and started walking back down the mountain, toward the station, toward his family, toward certain death. We watched him disappear into the clouds. Watched a man choose love over survival, choose to die with his family rather than live without them. Six of us remaining. We reached 10,000 feet as the sun was setting, or what passed for sunset under the gray-green ceiling. The light didn't fade so much as change quality, becoming dimmer, more diffuse. The floating creatures above us glowed faintly in the darkness, their bioluminescence creating moving patterns across the compressed sky. We made camp on a small plateau, too exhausted to go further, too close to give up. We ate cold food from cans, rationed water, didn't speak much. What was there to say? We all knew we were dying, knew the summit would only buy us days at most, knew that eventually the pressure would crush even the highest peaks on Earth. But we'd keep going anyway, because humans are stubborn, because giving up felt wrong even when continuing was futile, because maybe, impossibly, we'd survive long enough to see them leave, see them finish their work and depart, see the sky rise again. It was a fantasy, we all knew it, but fantasies were all we had left. On May 3rd, we resumed climbing, the final push to the summit. 2 miles and 1,000 feet of elevation gain. Should have taken a few hours. Took us 12. Carlos collapsed first, around 10,500 feet. Said he couldn't feel his legs anymore. Said his heart was beating irregularly, skipping beats, hammering too fast, then too slow. Diane checked him, shook her head. He was dying. The pressure was causing cardiac arrest. We sat with him, held his hands. Let him talk about Rosa and his children. Let him tell us about Miguel, who wanted to be a pilot before they took flight away from us. About Sophia, who loved to dance. About Isabella, who was only 4 and loved butterflies, and would never grow up to see what she could become. Carlos died quietly, just closed his eyes and stopped breathing, his body finally giving out under the crushing weight of the sky. We couldn't bury him, couldn't carry him, just closed his eyes, straightened his body, and kept climbing. Left him there on the mountainside like we'd left Robert, like we'd lost Tyler, like we'd lose everyone eventually. 5 of us now. At 10,800 feet, Marcus asked if he could stay. Not die. Just stop. Wait. He was 16 years old, and he'd climbed as far as he could. His body was giving out. His mind was fracturing. He said he wanted to rest. Just rest. And if the pressure took him while he rested, that was fine. He was tired of hurting. We tried to encourage him, tried to tell him the summit was close. But he shook his head. Said his parents had told him to be strong, and he'd been strong. He'd climbed for 30 days, and he'd been brave, and he'd survived. But now he was done. Zoe hugged him. Amanda cried. Diane kissed his forehead like he was her son. I left him the extra blanket and some food and told him I'd remember him. Told him his parents would be proud of what he'd accomplished. Marcus smiled. First real smile I'd seen from him. He said, "Tell them I made it high. Tell them I climbed almost to the top of the world." We left him sitting on a rock, looking up at the gray-green sky, waiting for whatever came next. 4 of us now. We reached the summit at noon on May 4th, 11,000 feet elevation, the highest point for 50 miles. We'd climbed for 2 days and covered less distance than people used to walk in an afternoon, but we'd made it. The pressure here was 1,380 millibars, still rising. We'd gained 3,000 feet, and the atmosphere had descended 6,000. We were losing the race. The sky was falling faster than we could climb. But the view from the summit made us forget the pressure for a moment. We could see for 100 miles in every direction, or as far as the clouds and haze allowed. Below us, the carpet of clouds looked solid, like we were standing on an island above a gray-white ocean. The floating creatures were everywhere now, dozens visible, maybe hundreds beyond the horizon. A fleet, an armada, a migration. And we saw what was above the clouds, what had been beyond our atmosphere, beyond the sky, invisible to our instruments, and was now close enough to see clearly even through the heavy air. A structure, massive beyond any scale humans had ever built. It filled the sky from horizon to horizon, blotting out whatever sun remained behind the gray-green ceiling. A construction that was part organic, part architectural, all incomprehensible. Curves that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Surfaces that reflected light wrong, showing colors that had no names. Openings that might have been windows or might have been orifices, arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence, but not human intelligence. The structure was descending with the atmosphere. No, the structure was pushing it down. The weight of that thing, that city or ship or organism or all 3, was compressing our entire atmosphere, crushing it down layer by layer, squeezing the breathable air into an impossibly thin band that got smaller every day. And we finally understood. This wasn't an attack, wasn't an invasion in any meaningful sense. This was colonization, settlement. The universe had been full of life the whole time, and one of those lives needed high-pressure environments to survive, needed air so dense it would crush us, needed conditions that existed on their world or in the depths of gas giants, or in the compression zones of dying stars. They'd found Earth, found a planet with an acceptable gaseous atmosphere, and they were compressing it down to the pressure they required, making it livable for them, which meant making it deadly for us. We weren't being exterminated, we were being displaced, casualties of cosmic real estate development. Marcus spoke for the first time in hours. His voice was quiet, defeated. We were always going to lose. Since the moment they decided to land, we were dead. We just didn't know it yet. I set up my equipment on the summit, the portable radio transmitter, powered by batteries that were running low. Started broadcasting. Someone needed to hear this. Someone needed to know what happened to us. Even if that someone was just other humans dying on other mountains, at least they'd understand why. This transmission you're hearing now, this is being recorded on May 5th through May 15th. Day 32 through day 42 since the descent began. I'm on the summit of Mount Kendrick with 3 other survivors, and I need to tell you everything before we run out of time. The sky is falling, not metaphorically. The actual atmosphere is being compressed by something descending from beyond where we could see. A structure that might be a ship or a city or a living thing or all 3. It's planet-sized, bigger than any celestial body except the Earth itself. And it's landing, slowly, deliberately, crushing our thin layer of breathable air down to nothing as it descends. The things we're seeing in the clouds, the floating organisms, they're part of their ecosystem. They exist in high-pressure environments. They need dense air to survive, air so thick it crushes human bodies. And they're transforming the Earth to suit them, one valley at a time, remaking our world into something they can inhabit. Anyone at elevations below 5,000 feet is dead. The pressure has crushed everything: buildings, trees, bodies. If you're still alive, you need to be above 10,000 feet minimum, and that's only buying you days at most. The descent is accelerating. At current rates, even the highest mountains will be under unsurvivable pressure within 2 weeks. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The sky is falling on the entire planet, and we can't stop it, can't fight it, can't even comprehend it fully. But I need you to know what happened. Need someone somewhere to remember that we existed, that we tried to survive, that we documented our own extinction as scientifically as we could. On May 6th, Diane died in her sleep, a brain hemorrhage caused by the pressure, blood vessels bursting inside her skull. She went quietly, peacefully. We were grateful for that small mercy. Found her in the morning already cold, a slight smile on her face like she'd finally found rest. 3 of us left, me, Amanda, and Zoe. We sat on the summit and watched the world compress, watched the structure above us grow larger as it descended, watched the floating things multiply, filling the clouds with their alien presence, watched the valleys below transform, the glossy patches spreading, new structures growing from the changed Earth. Amanda asked if I thought they knew we were here, if they cared, if our deaths meant anything to them. I said I didn't think they noticed us at all. We were microbes to them, bacteria living in a thin film on a planet they needed. They were sterilizing the surface, not out of malice, just out of necessity. Making it habitable for themselves meant making it uninhabitable for us. We were collateral damage in their settlement, nothing personal. Just physics and biology and the cold calculus of survival. On May 8th, The pressure reached 1,450 millibars. Amanda started coughing blood that afternoon. Her lungs were filling with fluid, drowning under the weight of the air. She died that night, struggling for breath, while Zoe held her hand and cried and told her it would be okay soon, that the pain would stop soon. 2 of us remaining, just me and Zoe. On May 10th, we saw something that broke what was left of our hope. The structure above us opened, not like a door, more like a membrane parting, like a cell dividing. And things came out. Not the floating creatures we'd been watching. Something else. Larger, more purposeful. Mechanical or organic or something in between. They descended through the clouds in formation, hundreds of them, heading toward the crushed valleys below. Through binoculars, I watched them land. Watched them begin moving through the ruins of human civilization with clear intention. They were salvaging, collecting, taking pieces of our world and carrying them back up into the structure. Buildings, vehicles, maybe bodies, though it was hard to tell at this distance. They were studying us, maybe, or just clearing away the debris of the previous inhabitants, cleaning up after compression. We were being erased, not just killed, erased, our cities dismantled, our artifacts collected as curiosities, our entire species reduced to samples in whatever passed for their museums or laboratories. Everything humans had ever built, ever created, ever thought meaningful, being packed away like relics from an extinct culture. Because that's what we were now, extinct. Or close enough that the difference didn't matter. Zoe couldn't take it anymore. She was 21 years old, an art major who'd wanted to create beautiful things. Instead, she got to watch the world end. Watch everything beautiful crushed under an alien sky. She stood up on May 12th, looked at me with eyes that had given up, and said, "I don't want to wait anymore. Don't want to feel my body slowly fail. Don't want to spend days dying when I could spend minutes." I understood, asked her if she was sure. She nodded, said she'd thought about it, had been thinking about it since Tyler jumped, since Carlos died, since Amanda drowned in her own lungs. Said she wanted to choose her own end rather than let the pressure choose for her. She walked to the edge of the summit, looked back at me once, and said, "Thank you for trying to save us, for giving us hope even when there wasn't any. Tell Emma, if you ever find her, that someone loved her mother very much." Then she stepped off, fell into the clouds below, just like Tyler, just like so many others. Choosing their end rather than waiting for it to be chosen for them. I'm alone now, last one left on the summit, last person broadcasting. Maybe the last person alive at any elevation in North America. Maybe the last person alive anywhere. The pressure is 1580 millibars as I record this final message. The structure is so close now I can see individual sections. Areas that might be habitation zones. Ports that might be for docking the floating creatures. Surfaces covered in growth or machinery or biological systems that serve purposes I'll never understand. The compressed air is so thick I can barely move through it. Every breath is labor. Every heartbeat is pain. I'm bleeding from every orifice. My vision is blurring. My thoughts are fragmenting. I know I'm dying. The pressure is crushing me. Maybe another day. Maybe hours, but soon. I tried to call Emma one last time. Just spoke into the radio, broadcasting to Australia, hoping somehow she could hear me across the dead airways and collapsed satellites. I said I loved her, said I was proud of her, said I was sorry I wouldn't be there to see what she became. I don't know if she heard. I'll never know. But I said it anyway. The sun is setting now, or what passes for sunset under the structure. The light filtering through is wrong. Green-gray, diffuse. The world looks alien already. Maybe it always was alien. Maybe Earth was always theirs, and we were just borrowing it for a brief moment. My body is shutting down. I can feel it. Organs failing under the pressure. Blood vessels bursting. Brain struggling to maintain consciousness. I have maybe hours left. Maybe less. But I wanted to broadcast this. Wanted to leave a record. If somehow, impossibly, someone survives this, if some human somewhere finds a way to adapt or escape or endure, I want them to know what happened, that we tried, that we documented our end as scientifically as we could, that we stayed human until the very last moment. The sky fell. Something came down from beyond our atmosphere. Something vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to us. It compressed our air, crushed our world, transformed our planet into something they could inhabit. We couldn't stop it, couldn't even understand it fully. We were just in the way. Tell Emma I love her. Tell her I thought about her every day. Tell her I hope she survived somehow. Hope she's alive somewhere, on some mountain, fighting to breathe, refusing to give up. That's what I want to believe. That somewhere, my daughter is still alive, still trying, still being the brilliant, stubborn, beautiful person I raised her to be. The sky has fallen. We are gone. They have won. But we existed. For a brief moment in cosmic time, humanity existed. We built cities and created art and loved each other and looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. We weren't alone. We never were. We just didn't know our neighbors existed until they decided to move in. This is Dr. Claire Mendoza. I was a meteorologist. I studied the sky my whole life, tried to understand its patterns, predict its changes, explain its beauty, and in the end, the sky killed me. Killed all of us. The pressure is unbearable now. I can't breathe, can't think clearly, can't see properly. Everything is going dark. I can feel the structure descending, feel its shadow falling over the mountain, feel it getting closer. The sky has fallen. We are gone. Remember us. Remember that we were here. Remember that the sky was once high and blue and full of birds and clouds and hope. Remember that we looked up at it and dreamed of flying. Remember that we built our civilizations under an open sky that went on forever. Remember. Emma, I love you. I'm sorry.